Welcome to the Popcorn Talk Network, for the online broadcast network that features movie discussion, news, and interviews. Press 1. Popcorn Talk. We talk movies. From the Popcorn Talk Network, the online broadcast network for movie talk, Alicia Malone with Scott, Movie Mantz, and the Schmoes Know. This is Profiles. In-depth spotlights on the greatest filmmakers and artists in motion picture history.
Hello, profilers, or should I say, hello, Beatle people. Welcome to a very, very special episode of Profiles. My co-host, the lovely and talented Alicia Malone. Why don't we get that hashtag going on Twitter right now? Get this trending. Hashtag the lovely and talented Alicia Malone.
That's right. You got to mute my computer, Scott.
I got to mute the computer. How do I do that?
Just mute that thing.
Mute
George
that thing.
Martin was here.
Here we go.
Jeff Emmerich was instructed to do that.
We are going with Profiles. The lovely and talented Alicia Malone is in the Cannes Film Festival. So while the cat's away, don't tell anyone, Profilers. We are doing a special episode of Profiles on my favorite subject, the Beatles.
That's right. Wait, is the Red Fury going to activate when she comes back mad at me for taking her place?
We'll be cool. We'll
be
cool. We'll keep it subtle. But here's the thing. Now, the Beatles, the greatest rock and roll band of all time.
Yeah.
But they were also movie stars. So watching them act naturally, we're going to talk about it today. And we have your ticket to ride. We are very, very excited. My good buddy, my pal, you know him as the Pit Boss. I know him as my good buddy, Beatle Ken Napzok. Ken Napzok, thank you so much for joining us on Profiles.
Thank you for having me, man. You know that the Beatles are one of my big life's passions. That's why we connected as friends. So to get this opportunity to talk about the Fab Four and their movies, which as a Beatle fan growing up and a second, third generation Beatle fan, you know, every generation seems to find them over and over and over. The movies just expanded my love for them once you realized, they're in movies too? So I'm so excited to be talking about it here.
Well, joining us is our very, very, very special guest, the host of the #1 Beatles radio program in the country in LA, Los Angeles. It's on 95.5 KLOS every Sunday morning. Breakfast with the Beatles. Please welcome Beatle Chris Carter. Yes.
How are you guys?
Very, very excited,
nice
Chris.
to be here.
Thank you so much. What an honor to have you. Yeah. All right, Chris Carter is in the house. Now,
it looks like it's going to be fun.
It's going to be fun.
From the opening of the show, it looks like it's going to be fun.
It's all about energy. It's all about vibrancy. And it is all about the Beatles and the Beatles movies. But where would the Beatles movies be without the music? So when we get to our first topic here, which is our first blood, I want to ask both of you guys, when it comes to the music, what is the first Beatles song you ever remember hearing? Whether it had an impact on you or not, is something you just remember. Chris, let's start with you.
The first Beatles song I ever heard would be I Want to Hold Your Hand. I was in the back seat of, I believe, I can't remember what it was. It was, I'm not going to go there because I'm not quite sure if the car was around in that year. And then everybody goes, that car wasn't even out then in 1964. But it was like 1964 or 65, and I was just listening as a passenger in a car, but I remember it, and I remember right where I was on Route 23 in a little circle in Wayne, New Jersey.
Wow.
Well, how about you, Ken?
For me, the first time I associated a song with that group, the Beatles, was Love Me Do. For some reason, as a kid growing up, I grew up in the 80s, and then you have all the stuff going on. That song jumped out, and that was the first time I remember that's the band. But as I once told you the story, it was a slumber party for my friend Brandon, and my friend Sean Phillips came up to me and goes, have you ever heard of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band? I'm like, no. And he pulls out this cassette tape, puts it into the cassette player, and that just started my journey. It was
that'll do it.
Sean Phillips.
But you got to listen to the whole album straight through. That's an album where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. For me, growing up, when I was growing up in Philadelphia in the early 70s, the first Beatles song I ever remember hearing was She Loves You, because I remember the yeah, 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 and I just remember it being like a fun song, but I didn't really get into the Beatles. I didn't associate it with that band, because at the time when I was growing up, I was a Wings fan. I heard Jet and listened to what the man said and Band on the Run.
Before you heard heard.
Before I understood the Beatles.
That's interesting.
So when the movie I Want to Hold Your Hand came out in 1978, which was the directorial debut of Robert Zemeckis, my dad says, son, that guy is that guy. Yeah. And I went, oh, I get it now. But the Beatles, once I really got into the music, you were talking about really the best band of all time. They raised the bar. It has never been topped. They defined a generation, and every other generation that followed, kicked off the British invasion for bands like the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, and the Who. They evolved. Look at this evolution. I mean, Chris, you have to say, to go from She Loves You, Yeah, 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 to Tomorrow Never Knows, relax, turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream.
In 3 years, right?
3 years is astounding. They made 5 movies, and this is Profiles. And coming in at number 5 in our Fast 5 on our Profiles list is...
The Magical Mystery Tour is waiting to take
5.
away.
The Magical Mystery Tour.
In at 5, I thought it would be up in the top 2.
Top 4?
No.
I don't know. No, this was
kidding.
This was a TV show that premiered on the BBC on December 26, 1967.
Boxing Day.
Boxing Day. Very good, gentlemen. Directed by the Beatles, mostly Paul. And when it premiered, this was the Beatles' first failure. The critics hated it. Why did the critics hate it, Chris?
Well, couple of reasons.
Yeah.
Number one, they aired it in black and white, which if you think about a colorful film like, your Magical Mystery Tour, I don't know where the cameras are. It's such a colorful, mind-blowing experience that, to see it in black and white must have really taken the air out of it. And it was, without a doubt, the weirdest thing that the Beatles had offered up visually, following the first 2 films. So everybody was a bit stunned and shocked.
They were shocked and stunned.
And that was probably the top 2 reasons.
Well, what is your take on when you first saw Magical Mystery Tour, and what do you like about it now, Ken?
Well, we discussed in our pregame here, Scott. I was in film school again when I'd seen this, but I really dove into it, and I never understood why people didn't like this movie, because for me, this was an avant-garde, Monty Python-esque kind of obtuse movie, and I loved it. I tried to, in my high school video production class, I got videos where I got reverse negatives and I used the song Flying, because to me that just...
Flying.
Which, by the way, in black and white, that sequence, you're just staring at clouds for a minute 40.
Right.
But by the time they showed it in color a few days later, the damage was already done.
But may I just add, it does contain, for my money, the finest rock video, if you will, of all time.
I'm the Walrus.
Yeah. That is, you can put anything up against that, any of your MTV, any of your compilation of your favorite bands. That is, for my, again, for me, the finest, visual to go along with any song ever.
And that's what McCartney in the later years would say. He goes, yeah, all right, it is.
So
what
that
it is.
alone, for that alone, you know,
got it.
For that alone, that is absolutely the one redeeming quality. Although I do like your Mother
there's
Should
more.
Know.
There's much more. There's much more.
Well, Time Magazine at the time said that Time Magazine review at the time said Paul directed, Ringo mugged, John did his imitations, George danced a bit, and when the show hit the BBC last week, the audience gagged. Shortly afterwards, Paul took the brunt of the blame because he was primarily the director of that movie. He says, we don't say it was a good film. If we goofed, then we goofed. It was a challenge that didn't come off. We'll know better the next time. This is a wild, trippy, aimless movie. It is the most expensive home movie ever shot back in the 60s, but it has gained a huge following since then, and I feel like it's the sort of humor that inspired Monty Python.
It's the same school of comedy for me, and I grew up influenced greatly by Monty Python. And it was the reason I got into comedy here in LA, was kind of that, like I said, that weird, obtuse, dead pigeon kind of humor, and a lot of that came from that. A lot of like off-the-cuff stuff, and just for some reason Lennon scooping up spaghetti and
where are you going to see John Lennon shoveling spaghetti? and let's not forget, the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band doing Death Cab for Cutie, which went on to be, a band name.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff. And again, you said, Your Mother Should Know at the end. You can pick the song sequences alone, and they're all top shelf. I mean, none of that's, okay, in between the bus scenes and the magicians and everything.
And Mr. Blood Vessel.
Yeah, leaves maybe a little to be desired, but it moves so quick. The whole thing's only 55 minutes. So shut up and watch it.
Minutes.
Love it.
And on our live chat, Tom Matthias Music said Steven Spielberg cited Magical Mystery Tour as a very influential film for him.
Sure.
And it's amazing that when you consider Magical Mystery Tour, which was, like you said, only 55 minutes, that could have been the better film than the one that they almost made, a film written by playwright Joe Orton called Up Against It. And Chris, what would this movie have been up against it if they went and did that movie instead?
That's a good question. Are we going to have a whole segment on the movies that they were going to make?
We'll sprinkle
I don't
it in.
really know. I can't tell you what that. I don't know what the reaction would have been like.
Well, Up Against It.
I mean, go ahead.
Would have been the Beatles' third movie, and Joe Orton said at the time the Beatles would have become involved in dubious political activity, dressed as women, committed murder, and committed adultery. That is just what parents want to see from the mop tops.
From the cheeky mop tops.
And they also wanted, there was going to be a Western. There was going to be, there were so many different vehicles for these guys at the time. It must have been, you could probably do a whole show on just how many pitches they must have gotten at the time. Hey, this is a great idea for I see the Beatles.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it must have been incredible. And the few we've heard about over the years, we all talk about. But I bet you there were probably hundreds more, incredible ones too.
Right.
Right. That we never knew about.
Well, we also have another segment called The Right Stuff, where we pick our favorite scene from a movie. But I want to bring it back to the music for a bit. And when it comes to The Right Stuff, what, Ken, are your top 3 favorite Beatles albums?
Well, you and I know, but to the audience who doesn't know, I'm a later Beatles guy.
Yep.
You're so poppy and cheery, and I'm so dark and depressed. I like when the band is fighting. Abbey Road continues to be, if there's one I'm going to put in for a drive, I reach for Abbey Road. Next to that, Revolver and Rubber Soul. And Revolver's December of 65. By August, 66, they got Revolver. That's a short window.
Yep.
And they take a giant leap. But for me, I'm a Harrison guy, and Rubber Soul's when Harrison kind of started to have his coming out party.
If I Needed Someone is a great George Harrison song.
Yeah.
What about you, Chris?
Well, if we're talking about the official UK albums that the Beatles released,
absolutely,
the American records are silly, with one exception. And that would actually be my favorite Beatles album. That would be the U.S. version of Rubber Soul, because I think the U.S. version of Rubber Soul is the only perfect Beatles record. I mean, if you look at that lineup of songs, it's perfect. Without that, Rubber Soul wouldn't be my favorite, because the real version that the Beatles put has some, clunkers for my money. So the White Album would be my favorite Beatles album.
My White Album is great. See, I do like the early Beatles stuff. I mean, Revolver, I would take Revolver over Sgt. Pepper, because while Sgt. Pepper works better as a whole, and it is the album that changed everything and made pop into art, I feel like song for song, Rubber Soul or Revolver is a much, much better album. But I do like the early stuff, and that is why Help, to me, is a perfect pop album. I mean, you have You're Gonna Lose That Girl, Another Girl, The Night Before, Ticket to Ride.
But we got ripped off in America on the Help album.
That's why we're talking about the British albums, and buried, the second to the last song on side 2 of Help, if you're playing the LP, is Yesterday. The song that became the most
not
covered.
Released as a single by the Beatles.
Right.
Not in the UK, but it was done later in the US. But my all-time favorite Beatles album is A Hard Day's Night, the only Beatles album of all the Beatles albums where every single song, all 13 songs,
is a Lennon McCartney song.
Lennon McCartney,
No
and
covers.
Who wrote more of those songs?
Well, it's a John Lennon solo album, A Hard Day's Night, if you think about it, because I think there's 13 songs, and John sings 10, George sings 1, Paul sings 3 or 2.
Three.
And 3, and I'm just going off the top of my head. And, that never happened before. After, if you look at the Beatles albums, John would always be, come on, John, we need another, come on, John, we need another couple of songs. Paul's got 5 already,
But the Paul songs on that album, And I Love Her,
great.
Can't Buy Me Love, and one of my all-time favorites.
And here's a reel-to-reel of it that came out in Great Britain, if you live there.
Wow.
This is a British reel-to-reel.
Wow, look at
which
that.
are different, which are really cool because they would put it right on the leader tape, and some of them actually have EMI reels. The later ones had the EMI reels, but. Wow. Yeah, there you go.
That is very, very cool merchandise you got there, my
little
friend.
show and tell while we're
very
talking.
Cool. Well, now we're going to get into a segment we like to call The Last Detail, where we just sort of throw out some Beatles movie trivia. And the biggest one, this is pretty well known among movie fans and Beatles fans, is that later in the 60s, the Beatles almost made a version of Lord of the Rings that was going to be directed by Stanley Kubrick. Can you imagine? It was going to be, John was going to be Gollum, Paul was Frodo, George...
Fredo or Frodo?
Frodo. George was Gandalf, and Ringo was Sam. That would have worked, I think.
Ringo, he's like a little common gardener.
But John, Gollum, that would have really worked. Another one is that Sean Lennon didn't know his father was a Beatle until he saw Yellow Submarine. His babysitter played it for him, and when he asked his dad about it, he said, I don't really do that anymore. But that's very interesting that and that's a lot of people, a lot of kids, their first entry into the Beatles is Yellow Submarine. You see a lot of kids at schools playing Yellow Submarine, and that's just a great thing, the way the Beatles just continually go from generation to generation to generation.
When Sean handed me that cassette in 1987, I had no idea.
Sean Phillips.
My friend Sean. We handed that to me. It was totally organic.
I mean, when you do your show, when you host around, and when you get people calling in, and what doesn't it, like, aren't you marveled at the prospect of just how the influence of the Beatles?
And the age range also, I always say that, same goes with the Beatles as goes with Paul McCartney when he plays live. If you go to see Paul live anywhere, you can look at any given row, and you'll see a guy in his 30s, you'll see kids, 9, 10 years old, you'll see a hippie, with white hair and a tie-dyed shirt, you'll see a couple of guys in their 50s and 60s, and you cannot name another rock band that you would see that at. If you go see the Stones, you don't see 9-year-old girls. They're not there. It's the Stones. They can't afford it, first of all. But when you go see Paul, and it's the same thing with the Beatles. They were cool to 9-year-olds, and they were cool to 29-year-olds, at the same time. And you're hard-pressed to find anybody, who can capture that. That's magic in a bottle, as they say. It's to get anybody, because everybody is got this little niche and this little group here who likes this and that, but the Beatles kind of broke that barrier, and to this day I don't think you can name anybody that can do that. Pick your rappers or whoever, pick anybody you want. They can't get that cross section the way the Beatles did.
Well, we're just going to take a moment to just pause for some business. If you love Profiles, if you are watching, if you are listening right now, please continue to support Profiles by going to iTunes and subscribe to Profiles. Rate and review us on iTunes. These ratings and reviews are what keep these shows alive. So please rate and review us on iTunes. Go to youtube.com/Popcorn Talk Network and subscribe to Profiles there. Make sure you go to our Facebook page, which is Profiles with Malone and Mantz. And if you want to know who our next profile is, make sure you like our Facebook page, Profiles with Malone and Mantz, and join in on the fun. When we ask you what your favorite movies are and why, you can join in. We read those comments on the air, and you can join in on the brackets. We got a very interesting bracket, our toughest one yet for today's show. And make sure you follow us on Twitter. Follow me at Movie Mantz. Follow Alicia Malone at Alicia Malone, at Movie Mantz, at Alicia Malone, at Movie Mantz, at Alicia Malone. And Ken, where can we find you online?
At Ken Napzok is my Twitter, Periscope, Instagram, across the board, social media branding, all that good fun, and the Napzok Files podcast, and of course Jedi Alliance here every Monday on the Popcorn Talk Network, and Schmoes Know every Thursday.
And how about you, Chris? Where can we find you online?
Where can you find me online? You'd say breakfastwiththebeatles.com. also at Chris Carter's BritishInvasion.com. Those are the 2 radio shows that I host. The other one's on Sirius XM in Little Steven's Underground Garage. Yeah, which is a lot of fun. 4 hours of British Invasion, not just 64 to 67. We play, Mott the Hoople and T-Rex and, the Stripes. So
you
anything.
like late 60s, early 70s, don't you?
I do.
That's your jam.
That's my jam.
Very good. Very, very good. Well, let's keep this British Invasion going with our Fast Five. Coming in at number 4 is...
Let it be, let it be, let it be.
That is Let It Be, ladies and gentlemen, released in the United States on May 13th, 1970. That would be 45 years ago tomorrow. Wow. Directed by Michael Lindsay Hogg. That won an Academy Award for Best Music Original Score Song. And Quincy Jones accepted the Oscar on the Beatles' behalf. And this is what I have to say about Let It Be. It's a hard movie to find right now because it hasn't been commercially available for a long time, but Chris, I believe you have a copy here.
Well,
I brought along. Show us.
I brought along the laser disc.
Wow! Remember laser disc, ladies and gentlemen.
And what's cool about this is because it's so hard to find, as Scott said. When you go to eBay and you try to find a copy, you can't find them because they made them off of the laser discs when they came out. So you can get a good copy of Let It Be out there floating about with a lot of outtakes and extra things. But unfortunately, I don't believe it's ever going to come out.
Okay, I'm going to ask you why in a second, because when you watch Let It Be, this movie was filmed in January of 1969, conceived by Paul as a way for the Beatles to get back, no pun intended, to their roots after the very stress-filled White Album sessions where they branched off in the 3 different studios. They were not acting like a band, and Ringo quit the band at one point during the making of the White Album, and this just further divided the band apart. When you were watching Let It Be, you were watching a band break up, and for this movie to have been filmed less than 5 years after A Hard Day's Night, where they just looked so happy being Beatles. It is raw, it is honest, it is hard to watch, it is depressing, but that is what makes it a great movie, especially when they go up to the roof and they're just jamming and the cops shut them down.
Thanks,
Chris,
Mo.
why are we never going to see this movie?
Well, the reason I believe, and again, this is just what I have heard, George Harrison always voted against it when they would be voting on these things. It was all set to come out right around the time when Let It Be Naked came out. They had promos for it. I actually have a Japanese TV, promotional film that they had all ready to go, which is great. It has all the outtakes and extras on it. And they had a second disc, and they had done all the interviews for, they had interviewed everybody, just like they had done for the Magical Mystery Tour and Help and Hard Day's Night. But because George didn't want it, and of course George isn't here to vote any longer, his family votes accordingly. So I believe that's the reason it's not going to come out, because George didn't want it to come out.
And there's that scene in the film with George,
which is so overblown. My goodness, I mean, if you're in a band and that's your worst fight you've ever had, then that's it. And I also just want to add a little something to what you were saying. People always talk about this dire situation this band was in, and they hated each other. And if you listen to all the Let It Be, I have a 86 CD collection of Let It Be. If you listen to what was going on there, I'm here to tell you, they were not hating each other. They were having a really good time. Same as the White Album. They were having a good time. You listen to John in between songs, they're always happy. The myth of how these guys were at each other's throats has been so blown out of proportion. Because don't forget, they made Abbey Road after Let It Be. So to come up with your favorite record and such a quality, piece of product at the time, sonically and songwriting, they had to have still been close, and they were close. People want to pit them against each other for various reasons, but it's not as bad as
Business got in the way and all that stuff, but it's an excellent point because McCartney just released a song on his album in 2013, New, Early Days, which there's references to McCartney saying, I guess people know what happened better than I do, but I was there.
I was there.
And I love that take on that, Chris, because this documentary, again, growing up a Beatles fan.
See, if you just witness, though, what there is to witness, like I said, if you watch what they say, and the same thing with Plastic Ono Band, John's Primal Scream album, if you listen to all the in-between song banter with John, he's laughing, he's making jokes. I mean, it's not as bad off.
Well, also, when you're watching this movie and they get up to the roof, and they are playing live for the first time since August 29th, 1966, when they closed out their touring years at Candlestick Park in San Francisco, and they're doing Don't Let Me Down. And John and Paul are looking at each other, and they're smiling.
They're a band,
It is great.
man.
And that's what I love about the Let It Be movie. They get up on the roof, they start playing Let It Be, or start playing Get Back, and then it goes down to the streets. And people are looking up like, what's that sound? Oh, it's music. What's the music? Oh my God, it's the Beatles! Oh my God!
And they were so damn good that day, because you forget those songs that are on, Let It Be, like, One After 909 and I've Got a Feeling, and they're live, and I Dig a Pony. Those are live songs. People forget because it sounded so produced when you got it, but that was live, and it was cold. It was like it was like 48 degrees that day. That's nippy, up there. There was no sun, and it was cloudy, and they did a really good job.
That's that
up there.
Clip from the anthology third disc.
They could have really sucked. They could have really been horrible, because you've heard them be horrible at times. They weren't always perfect, but they could have had clunkers and things, and the same people at the street would have been going, is that the Beatles? But they delivered big time. And,
can you imagine being like in some other building and then looking out the window and then opening the window and there are the Beatles playing live?
They weren't doing songs that anyone knew, so that was the tricky thing. They weren't doing any hits. They was like, what are these songs? I never heard Get Back before.
Well, looking back in the late 90s, Paul had this to say about the Let It Be movie. He said, I think Let It Be was good, but it wasn't the film we meant to make. It's a story of four guys breaking up. This is where it gets interesting. It's a horror story for me. But when you're watching,
Paul, it was.
When you're watching that movie and they're doing that in studio performance of Two of Us, which is such a great song for John and Paul to harmonize on.
They're so... And don't forget, right around that, shortly after that, the Ballad of John and Yoko, and Paul and John, again, everybody had them at each other's throats, and they're just cutting a record together. Paul and John doing a Beatles record in 1969. That's pretty heavy,
And I can totally understand why them or the Harrison estate wouldn't want this out. I get it, because there's so much wrapped around.
George hated it.
There's so much, but there's so much stuff and if you can see the clips out there's so much stuff that reminds you as a Beatle fan that they did have it. I like Chris's take on that.
That's a good take. I'm with you. I want to believe that.
Later on, how do you sleep and all that stuff, and Beatles screwing Beatles on album covers.
See, that's when it got ugly.
But
the legal things, as a band, they were no different than any other band. But the stuff that they were fighting about in the White Album sessions was musical, and it was personal. It had nothing to do with the business yet. They were pro the business at that point. It's when it got ugly with the Eastmans and Klein, and Paul became the odd man out. That's when the stuff people talk about was real. That's when they really were at odds, and there was really heavy stuff going between the four of them. Fighting with Ringo during, Dear Prudence and USSR was nothing compared to that.
And it's just, I read that book, You Never Give Me Your Money. That was just like, no wonder they broke up. I mean, I was looking at the breakup of the Beatles starting when they stopped touring. And then it just got worse when Brian Epstein died. Right. And people go, "Oh, Yoko broke up the Beatles." No, I mean there were a lot of other reasons why the Beatles broke up. But that brings us to the next section of our show, which we like to call the quiz show, where we test each other's knowledge of the Beatles. And I have a feeling
I'm not playing.
Chris, you're going to get this no matter what. So my question for Ken, if we can cue up some Jeopardy music there, my friend. All right. If we don't have it, that's okay too. There we go. In A Hard Day's Night.
I've seen it.
What book is Ringo reading in the studio cafeteria? Is it A, it's multiple choice, is it Psycho? Is it To Kill a Mockingbird? Or is it Anatomy of a Murder?
Guy, you went detailed. You went deep. I believe it's Anatomy of a Murder.
Correct, sir. Very, very good.
If I'd missed that in front of Chris, I'd just get up and walk away.
Okay, now actually, this question is for Chris.
Oh, jeez.
At the end of Yellow Submarine,
I won't get it.
how many languages is the phrase "all together now" shown? Is it 11? Is it 13? Is it 16? Or is it 20?
Wow. You know what? I couldn't get that either. I've seen Yellow Submarine once, and it scared me as a child.
What were the numbers?
Okay, 11, 13, 16,
right.
or 20. All together now. All together now.
All together.
13.
Oh, it is 16.
16. Oh,
That's
I don't mind getting that one.
No.
Okay, we are moving on. You got one for me?
I've got one for you,
Okay,
Scott.
hit me up.
You're gonna get it. I got two for from the movies here.
Okay, let's see.
All right, and I don't have multiple choice there, you Mantz man.
That's all right. That's okay. Bring it on.
This one's well known, but I want to make sure you know it. And I want to make sure the listening audience knows it. What 13-year-old future rock drummer was in the crowd during the filming of the final concert?
Phil Collins.
In A Hard Day's Night.
Yes.
Yes. Phil Collins.
You want to hear a funny quick
do.
Phil Collins inside Beatles story? Okay. Phil always claims to be on All Things Must Pass, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That he plays like congas, bongos, right?
Yeah.
So, but George never could remember it, right? But Phil would say it in interviews. You know, I'm on All Things Must. George would read it and go, "Is he really?" So one night they were when the thing was coming back out, All Things Must Pass in 2001. They had some listening sessions, and they invited Phil Collins over, and they got a fake bongo track that was really bad. They had Ray Cooper play really horrible bongos, and they go, Phil, we think we found your bongo part on it. So they played the song, and they isolated the bongo. It was horrible, and they all sat there, and Phil was just like sweating. I played that? Yeah, you played that. It was terrible. Wow.
But you got another one for me, man?
That's awesome, then. One more for you, Scott. In Help, a running gag is that a swimmer keeps popping up asking for directions.
Mal Evans.
That's right.
Mal Evans, the Beatles roadie.
That's right.
The trusty sidekick, along with Neil Aspinall, who was there with them when they were just bumping around Liverpool.
We all know that in A Hard Day's Night, right? They never mention the Beatles.
They never mention. Oh my gosh, you're right.
There's a little fun fact for you.
Yeah.
They never said the words.
They never
the Beatles.
say the word the Beatles in A Hard Day's Night.
Which is why I love that scene.
I don't want to give you guys quiz questions.
That's good trivia.
I would bring that one
That's
in there.
awesome. And that great scene with Lennon and the female, I forget her name, the actress, and Mal's in that scene. Mal moves the upright bass, and she's like, you don't look like him
just
at all.
like you don't look like him. She looks more like him than I do.
You know the sad Mal Evans story, right? Unfortunately, we lost him here in Los Angeles, and they gave the job of all people to get Mal's body back to England to Harry Nilsson of all people, and the story was that they lost his body. They had his body, and it ended up in the dead letter office.
That was
Harry Nilsson used to make jokes. It had jokes.
Poor Mal.
Poor
Mal Evans.
Tragic end.
Do you like that? Before you could even finish,
I
was
got
impressive.
this down, man.
I told you last night, those came from my brain. I didn't look
Those
up in
are
a
good.
book, but
And Mal Evans produced what Apple hit?
Oh gosh, it was a bit. He told him to sign
Badfinger.
for Badfinger. He told him to sign Badfinger.
Which Badfinger?
It wasn't. I don't know.
You got questions.
No matter what.
No matter
Produced by
what
Mal
you are.
Evans.
Well, there you go.
There
Maybe
you go.
when they find his body, they can put it on his tombstone. Moving on.
Okay, let's move on.
With our Fast Five coming in at number 3 is.
Yellow submarine, yellow submarine, yellow submarine.
That would be, yes, Yellow Submarine, released on July 17th, 1968 in the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
In the United States, it was November 13th, 1968. Directed by George Dunning. 1 Grammy nomination for Best Original Score, Movie or TV. Wildly imaginative, very arty. Produced by Al Brodax, who did those 39 Beatles cartoons around 1965. Something that the Beatles were not themselves keen about. It was one of the last wishes of the late manager Brian Epstein, for them to do this. They weren't crazy about the idea. They wrote 4 relatively subpar songs for the album.
Hey.
And
Hey Bulldog is in there.
Hey Bulldog is decent, and so is
It's all too much.
It's
one of my favorite George songs.
But when they saw how it was going, that's when they decided to do that little cameo with the All Together Now. But what's your take on Yellow Submarine and its legacy in the pantheon of animated films?
Ken, go ahead, Ken.
Well, you know, for me, as I just mentioned, it's a movie I haven't seen a lot of, because when I saw it as a young Beatle fan, it kind of freaked me out. I was like, well, this isn't what I signed up for. This is animated versions and stuff, and there's these Blue Meanie characters, and it's kind of wild and crazy. Now, eventually, I became friends and roommates with a lot of people who went to KLOS, and they all viewed this as one of a very key, influential animated movie, so I can totally understand it from the history standpoint. I do focus on the soundtrack, which I think is a bit underrated, but there's also some great George Martin stuff in it here. Pepperland is one of my favorite little instrumental ditties there. So
you play that at parties, do you? People come over and say, what are you swinging to, Ken?
Pepperland.
You know, side 2 of Sgt. Pepper, the George Martin stuff. I mean, Yellow Submarine.
Well, interesting bit of trivia here. Eric Wells on our live chat says, in Yellow Submarine, the actor voicing George was discovered to be a British Army deserter, so he was fired, and the rest of his lines were recorded by Ringo's voice actor. Is that true?
I've heard that, but I defer to Chris on that.
I believe that is true.
Yeah. Well, Paul said...
And how about Eric Siegel?
Eric Siegel is...
guy. Right?
Who's Eric Siegel?
He wrote the Yellow Submarine.
Oh, he wrote the... Oh, there you go.
He went on to do, Love Story.
Did you know that the Blue Meanies have 6 fingers on each hand?
I did not.
I did not until I read it
it's the
online.
Extra finger that the Simpsons don't have.
Well, in the late 90s, Paul was asked about Yellow Submarine, the movie. He says, I thought it was very clever, had clever sequences, but nothing more. It was most definitely a piece of its time, and you can't escape the fact that it was very innovative. And our profiler, Beatle, Josh Price, had this to say about Yellow Submarine. Yellow Submarine is my favorite film featuring the Fab Four for a number of reasons. It represents an explosion of artistic expression, animated to look like an Andy Warhol painting that's come to life. The dazzling display of riotous and colorful imagery has come to define the entire concept of psychedelic art. The story is so appealing to every age, and with its undertones and sense of knowing, it seems to have a level of sophistication to accompany it, filled to the brim with whimsy, charm, and wonder. The result is an animated movie musical for the ages. And I got to tell you, Josh Price, you are putting my career as a film critic to shame.
I was going to say,
extremely well written.
Your profile fans are very well written.
They are. Aren't they great?
Not bad, Josh.
Yeah.
You gotta love Beatle Josh. Way
and
to go.
then we point out that Hey Bulldog, which is the one song really, recorded after the release of Sgt. Pepper, because all those songs were all in the can,
right.
But if you watch the video clip while they're recording Hey Bulldog, this is right before they went off to India. This is the last time the Beatles were the 4 Beatles that we knew and loved. The Beatles that, this is pre-Yoko, this is pre-India, pre-John, getting weird. If you watch the camaraderie between these 4 guys at the recording of Hey Bulldog, it really is the last time, and I mentioned that to Jeff Emmerich and the Beatles, and they all agreed. They said, because when they came back from India, as we all know, they were different people.
Wow.
Things were really different. Things really took on a whole nother, So if you watch that, John and Paul, they got their sweaters on. You could tell it was a cold day in January, February, and they were just coming in to record. And it's a great clip. It used to be the Lady Madonna clip until they had the wrong song queued up, but now it's all fixed.
Well, in addition to the Beatles movies, we are talking about movies about the Beatles. So now we get to the others, where we talk about best movies about the Beatles, and there's quite a wide variety to choose from. I want to start with the movie from 1994, directed by Ian Softly, a movie called Backbeat, which focuses on the Beatles in the Hamburg days, specifically the relationship between John Lennon and Stuart Sutcliffe, who was the bass player who left the band for a girl, Astrid
Kirshner.
But I love this movie. I think it's a great movie. It's a great soundtrack. Of
a lot of all-star
rock
bands at the time, and rock stars getting on that one. I think Dave Grohl had a lot to do with that soundtrack. There appeared on it a lot.
Good soundtrack, though, right, Chris?
Yeah, good soundtrack. It was a good, it was a period that not a lot of people were familiar with as, much as everything that we had heard about the Beatles from 64 onward. It was this great, kind of dark period that people really didn't know, a lot about what they were doing pre-fame. So it was good. It brought to light to a lot of fans what was going on. And it was, it was well portrayed, I think. Some falsehoods involved. But
Yeah, sure.
It took creative license, as these films often do.
they all do, every one of them.
Another movie that I love, and it's really the movie that got me, that really introduced me to, if not the Beatles, the impact of the Beatles. I Want to Hold Your Hand, 1978, directed by Robert Zemeckis. This is the flip side to the Beatles' first U.S. visit documentary. It is showing the impact of Beatlemania, the first trip when they conquered America, a bunch of teenagers trying to sneak into the Ed Sullivan Show for completely different reasons. Produced by Steven Spielberg. It's fun, it's vibrant, it's infectious, and the soundtrack is all Beatles music. Like, not cover versions, but before it got really, really expensive to do something like that.
And it's got Eddie Deason in there.
Yeah, I know everything about the Beatles.
I know more than the Beatles than anybody.
Yeah, that's our quiz thing for years and years.
Yeah, you still use it.
Oh, yeah, sure.
It's gold.
Yeah.
And now,
Awesome.
the legend that will last a lunchtime.
That's right.
Who is it? The Ruddles.
The Ruddles. This is one of my favorites. I told you I grew up influenced greatly by Monty Python, and so one of the kind of 7/honorary members of Python, of course, it was Neil Innes, who was in the Bonzo Dog Doo-Dah Band, appeared at Magical Mystery Tour for that, right? Singing that there at the end, not singing it, but playing in the band. So this, to me, and Harrison appears in this documentary.
Yeah, he loved it.
and he's, I believe at one point, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but he was like, this kind of tells the Beatles story better than we did.
Yeah. It's a fine piece of work, and all the music written by Neil Innes, as Ken said.
It's great.
Neil wrote all those songs in 2 weeks, which is really a mind blower if you think about it, because when you listen to them, he never really rips off. He rips off 3 songs at a time. You're like, that is, and then a little bit of that. And it's a great. He's got a great mind, twisted mind to be able to do that, and to make them all really listenable. Like I can listen to a lot of those songs. Double Back Alley is a great song. I think
Number one is a great song.
There's great songs on there. And all the psychedelic ones are great.
Cheese and Onions.
Cheese and Onions is
Get Up and Go.
classic.
I think Lennon warned Innes that you're going to get sued for that one because it's too close and too good. But, and I think Innes himself, who played Ron Nasty, the take of Lennon in this, no one has done a better Lennon than Innes as Ron Nasty.
Ron Nasty.
No, he's great.
But if you watch it, see, not knowing when these movies came out, if you watch the complete Beatles, and then you watch the Ruddles, you would swear that the Ruddles took the format from the complete Beatles. But the Ruddles came out in '78 when it was called All You Need Is Cash, and the complete Beatles came out in 1982. So, if anything, complete Beatles is copying the Ruddles. And the amazing thing about the Ruddles is they recorded their first album in a day. The second album took even longer.
We've arrived at the prove it we're here. All right. Any more water we have? Can we have any more water? Is there anybody you guys? Is there a bell you ring or anything?
We'll ring a bell.
Like, remember the Honeymooners? They had that little bell.
We'll get more
If
water
that's
for
the
you.
ice cream man, get me one.
While we're getting some water, let's talk about a movie. I want to get your take on this before I weigh on it. Let's talk about Across the Universe. You go first, Ken.
I've never seen it, Scott.
Well, that's quick. There you go.
That was quick.
That's my opinion on it. Other than I've heard a lot of the songs, and I know a lot of people like it.
What about you?
Well, I have to confess, my wife loves it, and I've watched maybe 60% of it. I have a little bit of a hard time, just personally, just with your basic musicals in general, you know, when people get burst into song.
That's like this provocation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I dig the Bono version with Secret Machines of, there's songs I like from it.
Right.
But overall, and again, like Ken, I haven't seen the whole thing. And I had an opportunity to, supposed to interview the director and do a whole bunch of things on Breakfast with the Beatles, but I just never got around to it. So on that one,
Chris,
I'm stepping to the side.
You're being way kind. I'm just going to cut to the chase here and say, I hated Thank you very, very much. Here you go. You wanted water?
I did.
You got water, my friend.
You have your own
I hated Across the Universe. I'm sorry, profilers.
Why did you hate it? Tell us why.
Because it was too on the nose. It wasn't clever. Like, first of all, you got Jim Sturgis is playing Paul McCartney, but he looks more like Wings era, 1976 Wings Over America Paul McCartney.
Yeah.
But then, like, the way the jokes, oh, who's that? Oh, she came in through the bathroom window. I mean, it just was so on the nose. There was nothing clever. It was so obvious. And to me, oh, she loved it. You like, I'm sorry, I just hated this movie.
But again, you know, I don't know how old she is, but I think, you know, again, we're coming at these things from, you know, experts, if you will, about the Beatles. I don't think it's made for us per se. I think it's made for this a whole different generation. You know, like my daughter and my wife, you know, they love it. You know, they loved it because it was made for them. It wasn't, you know, I don't think it's made for guys with reel-to-reels.
That might be an excellent point.
25 cents. I agree. Well, another film, you know, just cut into another quick couple films here. Nowhere Boy from 2009 about young John Lennon, starring Aaron Taylor Johnson. Thought that was a very good film.
I enjoyed it.
And another TV movie that came out in 2000, not really a Beatles movie.
Oh, Two of Us.
Two of Us.
Yeah.
Really good. Like, this is the fictional meeting that took place between John and Paul in the mid-70s when Paul just showed up unannounced at the Dakota and they were hanging out talking about the old times and they saw themselves being invited to do Saturday Night Live by Lorne Michaels.
$3,000. You can do whatever you want with Ringo.
But this meeting of totally hearsay, not even hearsay, it's totally fictional. But for Beatles fans who wanted to sort of know that John and Paul were cool towards the end, this was like a dream. This was something that I really wish did happen.
Right. And, you know, John and Paul did actually, you know, run into each other a few times, and there's those pictures of them hanging out when John was out here in '74. And then there was actually a jam session that took place between John and Paul with, you know, Stevie Wonder and all these amazing. On paper, it's the greatest session you've ever seen. You're like, wait, John, Paul, Stevie Wonder, Jim Keltner, and all these people. But it's unfortunately not the magic that it could have been.
Well, you know, we do these things every week on Profiles where we have brackets where people on our Profiles Facebook page, which is Profiles with Malone and Mantz. If I haven't said it once, I'll say it a million times. Please like our Facebook page right now. And we pit movies against each other until they get down to like a final round.
Right.
So we had these brackets, not for the Beatles movies because there were only 5, but for the Beatles songs, favorite Beatles songs. And in the second to the last round, it came down to a choice between All You Need Is Love versus Something and She Loves You versus Come Together. Then it came down to the final round. It was Come Together versus Something. And Beatle profilers picked as their favorite Beatles song, Something. George reigns supreme.
Sinatra would be happy with that, too.
That's right. And they were the same record.
Yeah.
They were the same record.
Abbey Road.
No, they were the same single.
Yeah.
Our good
Come
friends.
Together in Something.
Right. Yeah,
I mean, it was that.
Right.
So they only needed to buy one, and they would have been a
A-side,
home
B-side.
run.
Our good friend Steve Zissou, who's in charge of the Beatles brackets, pointed that out.
How far did In My Life go? Hey Jude. How far did these things go?
You know, She Loves You came down to the second to the last round. That would have been my pick.
Interesting.
But not as
I
far
have a
as you would
feeling
think.
if you took a real proper poll, In My Life is, I can play that at any given, like when I do live appearances, I can. That's the one song I know if I play hear the first 3 notes, every single person in the room goes, They all do the same thing, and it's like no other song by the Beatles gets that reaction. It's incredible.
But I'm happy with Something, though.
Moving on to number 2 in our Fast 5 is...
You know I need someone.
It is Help, ladies and
That's a
gentlemen.
little version.
I've got the vinyl version that came with the box set, the remastered box set. But Chris, what do you have there,
Oh,
my
it's just
friend?
a little reel-to-reel.
Another
That's another
reel-to-reel.
one.
Look at you with
I
the
brought my
reel-to-reels.
movie reel-to-reels for you.
That's
Hello.
awesome.
You know, just, you have to. It's 50 years old.
That's amazing.
That is cool.
I'm almost afraid of you watching you touch it. Like, what's going to happen to it?
I bring. These are the ones I just bring to show guys like you. I have really good ones at home, and
that he doesn't touch.
That I don't even look at.
The lights are pointed on.
Well, Help was released on July 29th, 1965 in the United Kingdom, August 25th in the United States, directed by Richard Lester, 1 Grammy nomination for Best Original Score, Movies or TV. This is the color one, and this is a pop art movie, inspired the Monkees a lot more than the movie that came before it. James Bond spoof. I think we can all agree that Help is not as good as A Hard Day's Night.
It is not.
No.
But it does have its many merits. Those merits are the musical numbers themselves. I love the in-studio.
Clothes, they looked fantastic in Help. If you haven't watched it in a long time, you forget like how long their hair was for 1965. And and we have to say, you can't skip over the fact that they were so incredibly stoned when they did this movie.
So stoned.
I mean, really stoned to the point that they would, they couldn't be found for hours at a time. They would be like, "Where are they?" That one scene where they run off, they just kept running. They just kept running to smoke a joint. It was incredible. It's just something you have to point out, because
it's obvious.
If you watch the movie, you get it. Yeah,
and you could see because they laugh through everything. They're just having a really good time, and you could tell they weren't really thinking too much about it. They were really taking orders, is this what we're doing today? Okay, great.
And later on, when the movie came out, they remarked that they felt like extras in their own film because there was so much going on. But when you watch the musical numbers, the in-studio version of You're Gonna Lose That Girl is so great. Another Girl is such a great song.
And they were
sequence.
told, they were basically told this is the name of the film, which is a first for the Beatles. So they were really writing, because, as a lot of people know, the original title was going to be Eight Arms to Hold You. There's actually, if you get the Ticket to Ride 45, it says from the film Eight Arms to Hold You. But so this is the first time someone said, it's called Help. John would okay.
And writes that great song. This is the songs in this. For me as a fan, it's the maturation process has really kicked in, and Help such a kind of a dark pop song when you break it down. And then for me, one of my all-time favorite Beatles songs is You've Got to Hide Your Love Away. That's not a happy little cheery tune.
By John.
John was at his he was, the depression was setting in a bit, just because by this time they were so tired, because we only think of the Beatles from the Ed Sullivan Show onward, but in 1963, that whole year before the Beatles came to America, that was the real year of Beatlemania. That's when they were, if you looked at how many shows they played and how much TV shows and BBC, they were working like crazy. So by the time
they were having fun.
By the time this came along and they were in the Bahamas and stuff, they were really fed up with a lot of stuff, and they were kind of they would get rude to a lot of the fans that would they were grumpy Beatles at this point.
Grumpy Beatles. Well, when it came out,
and you wouldn't think they should be, but
no, I get it. That's
when
exhausting.
It's work for them. They were really pushed to the the limit.
But when it came out in August of 1965, this was right when the Beatles played Shea Stadium. So even though my favorite period is 1963 actually, because they were playing all those shows and there's a lot of live performances, but they were still hungry, so they could still hear themselves. Right. It sounded good live, and then that just continued to take on a global domination in 64. But you could tell, at least up until the summer, that they were still enjoying themselves. I think by the time they got to their U.S. tour in August and September of 64, then it started to be like, okay, I think we're had enough of this. And look at the album cover for Beatles for Sale. That, my friends, is the face of the Beatles on Beatlemania.
Exhausted.
But Bosley Crowther, in his review of the New York Times for Help, said it is 90 minutes of good, clean insanity. And Paul said, looking back on it, Help isn't such a bad film. It's a lot more fun, but I think A Hard Day's Night is the better of the two.
Yeah, first, Help as a movie, if you haven't seen it yet and you're going to put it in, I put it in to refresh myself the other night on VHS, because that's the only form I have of it right now. Look, yeah, and I'd watched Hard Day's Night the night before, so contrast and compare.
Yeah.
One of them's better, one of them's not as. But if you grew up to like Zucker Brothers Naked Gun comedy, there's a lot of that kind of stuff in there, and there's kind of some fun stuff. Eleanor Braun, Liam McCurran, they do a great. Victor Spinetti again showing up. Anything he does is great in the Beatle movies, even Magical Mystery Tour.
And
you have to put it in the context of its time too. You know, the Bond films were really the rage. I mean, at that point, Goldfinger had just come out the year before. So that whole kind of, spy spoof thing or any kind of, chase that was going on, was perfectly.
There's some great lines. Ringo reaches his hand in the mailbox, and the cult member grabs his head, and John says, "What are you doing? Posting a letter." Like just little stupid lines like that.
Or he goes, "What are you doing on the floor? I'm tired."
And that living room was everybody wanted one of those.
I still have seen the movie the other night. One of my life goals is still to have a John Lennon sunken into the floor
bed. They really lived there. Those are really.
Oh, and the other thing, it's really interesting, it's freaky when you're watching Help, is right before they take off for the Bahamas and they're in their disguises.
How they ended up looking that way.
They really look that way, especially John.
John had the
beard. And the glasses.
Well, even Ringo had his beard that he would eventually grow and sport through the 70s.
They all looked like they would at one point.
Well, our profiler, Beatle Camille Howard, I put the inflection on Beatle just like you do on your radio show.
You have to.
Beatle Camille Howard says.
I don't say their last name though. That's what I would just go Beatlette Camille.
Beatlette Camille Howard.
That's how I do.
Help was the first Beatles movie that I saw at the height of Beatlemania. I thought that all bands lived together in interesting homes after the split. It's funny. It's got good tunes. What more do you need from a Beatles movie? Yeah. Very, very true.
And really, I think we said it earlier. The Monkees were patterned from that. That's a long episode of the Monkees. I mean, that is basically every episode of the Monkees is Help.
Yeah.
Well, now that brings us to a section of the show. And we talked about the Beatles movies. We talked about movies about the Beatles. Now, this segment is called Doc to Robert because it is about the Beatles.
I see what you did there.
Documentaries. See what I did there? Read my friend. I said, you call Dr. Robert. Of course, the Beatles documentary is the Beatles anthology.
Yeah.
8 parts, 10 hours, 2 new songs, the Beatles in their own words. What more do you want from a Beatles documentary? I love the Beatles anthology.
And don't forget, they got back together for the documentary, which I think a lot of people forget. You take it in kind of stride that this happened, but sometimes when I'm putting my show together and I'm going to play, Free as a Bird or Real Love, it dawns on me. I say, that happened. Those 3 guys got together, and there's so many Beatles songs that just had 3 guys. I've done sets of 13 songs without John Lennon, Beatles songs without John Lennon, so it wasn't uncommon that John wouldn't be on a Beatles song or be present, but there it was right there. And I think we took it for granted for some reason, because then when we lost George, we realized that would never happen again. But it was a magnificent moment that they did that, and recorded it.
The build-up for Anthology was great and grand. It was an event. That first night on ABC, I believe, on a Sunday night, I think it was.
November 19th, 1995.
I mean, that was an event. And until then, I had burned out my VHS copy of Complete Beatles. I just had watched it till Malcolm
Which
McDowell's
previously was the gold standard for the Beatles documentary.
By all means.
Bring one of the
Complete Beatles. This is a great documentary.
Yeah, it really was.
Because the Beatles Anthology is for people like us. It's the inside baseball version of the Beatles. If you're more of a casual fan and just want to know about the history of the group, this excellent documentary from 1982, I believe, narrated by Malcolm McDowell, is an album-by-album rise and fall of the Beatles. An album-by-album.
If you want the short version of the Beatles' career, it's still the best. I like it.
And it's on YouTube.
More than I think any other, documentary on the Beatles.
The anthology is exactly that's to go through that's what 10 parts. I mean, that's an effort. But if you want the shorter version, and that's what I grew up on, and so the anthology was just an expansion of all that and all the books you had read. But it was finally the Beatles in their own words.
Yeah, and like what Chris said, I mean, seeing them together, like that they put aside everything, it just was like, okay, they're cool. That's all that matters to me. Is that
all the past, you could tell it hasn't changed one bit. When I believe they were Paul was calling out to do Blue Moon of Kentucky or something, George would say, just one Blue. he was calling, and then they were doing the ukuleles and they were saying, and George was like, I wrote this one during the White Album, if you remember, and like they were slipping little things in the Paul. Oh yeah, I think I remember that, and he talked over it, and you could tell George looking at him like, I'm just trying to play this song.
But there was that moment in the anthology where Paul goes, hey George, remember when this happened? And George is just strumming his ukulele and he doesn't answer.
Right,
he just goes, I guess not.
I guess not. Exactly.
That is their relationship at the time. Yeah. And online on our live chat, Fan Solo says, anthology is the end-all, be-all of Beatles documentaries. That may be true, but as we speak, in the Cannes Film Festival, Ron Howard is debuting footage from his upcoming Beatles documentary about their touring years, which, oh my gosh, Alicia, if you are in Cannes, please see this movie and let me know how it is.
She's got to be an investor, I believe.
Yeah, well,
he's only showing it to the investors. Just tell them you got big money.
We got big money. We got big money behind Profiles. But another documentary. Now, if I was stuck on a deserted island, and I could only have one Beatles thing, whether it's the music or a documentary or a movie about the Beatles.
Give my regards to... No? Okay.
No, that's Paul, and that is a travesty. Give my regards to Broad Street, he's talking about. It is the Beatles, the first U.S. visit, which came out in 1991. It was a reworking of the Maysles brothers documentary, the Beatles in the USA from 1964. It is a fly-on-the-wall account of their first U.S. visit. You are with them in their limo when they are driving from John F. Kennedy Airport, the newly named John F. Kennedy Airport, into the city, and Paul's got his little transistor radio, and he's hearing the DJ talk about the Beatles are here, and Paul's going, yeah! I mean, they're just so excited.
And that's what this Ron Howard thing is really going to be. It's probably going to be an expanded version of that. It should be pretty incredible.
Oh, well, gentlemen, this brings us to number 1 on our Fast 5 Beatles, which is
Sextet.
It's been a hard day's night.
It's been a hard day's night indeed, gentlemen. Released in the UK.
Oh, I didn't show you this either.
Oh, let's see that.
No, I didn't show you my cool magical mystery tour.
Oh, wow.
This is the best album version. Look at that cover.
Wow, that's very cool.
Tour. Isn't that cool? That's my favorite
I Am the
one.
Walrus stuff there.
But anyway, Hard Day's Night. There you go.
Now, what's different between this version and the one that you're holding in your hand?
Well, I believe I have this German version I brought just because it looks cool.
Oh, that's very cool. But A Hard Day's Night came out in July of 1964, July 6, 1964 in the United Kingdom. Released in the USA August 11th that same year. Directed by Richard Lester. 2 Oscar nominations. One for Best Music, of course. The other Best Original Screenplay, Alan Owen. And what a screenplay that is, Ken Napzok.
He was known for writing Liverpudlian dialogue so well. One of the reasons he was brought in, and it captures, I mean, gosh, it's such a good movie.
It's a great movie.
And it's funny. I mean, all the stuff, you and I, every time we see each other, how many times a conversation do we go, you look very clean? Like, all that stuff's there, and it's layered. And when his grandfather looks at the lady, I bet you're a good swimmer. There's just so much comedy there. It's so funny. It's them. It's what so many people's memory of the Beatles is.
It solidified Beatlemania.
Yeah.
It solidified the personalities of John, Paul, George, and Ringo. And the cinema verite style, the black and white documentary feel that Richard Lester, I mean, of all the things the Beatles could have done for their big screen debut, whether it was their own movie or just being a guest in another film, which came up a few times, did they freaking luck out or what?
It was a masterstroke. It's a real movie. It's a great movie. It has all the elements, that you need to have a fantastic movie. Has, especially in a musical setting, the songs are as good as the movie, which never would be the case again. That the movie actually matched the music. It was so perfectly, put together. And one of the interesting things that you talk about Paul's grandfather, Wilfred Bramble. What's interesting about him is, guess how old he was when he was playing a grandfather?
Wasn't very old.
He's 52.
Yeah.
I'm 55. So that old guy, I'm like, I'm older than Paul's grandfather. It's like I watch All in the Family and I go, I'm older than Archie Bunker. Am I older than Archie? How can I be older than Archie Bunker?
In the next Star Wars movie, Luke Skywalker's going to be older than Obi-Wan was in A New Hope. It kind of tweaks your brain a little bit in that.
We mentioned it before. They never say the Beatles.
They never say
Yeah.
the Beatles.
In A Hard Day's Night, which is,
The movie
great.
cost $500,000 to make. They started filming it on March 2nd, 1964, less than 2 weeks after their return from the USA. Look at this period of time. They played Paris and sort of bombed. Then they took over America. They come back. They make their movie for the next 2 months. And then they do the Denmark, the Netherlands, Australia. And all the while, John and Paul, mostly John, came up with 13 brand new songs for the LP version of A Hard Day's Night, which is right here.
And again,
ladies
it's the
gentlemen.
only Beatles album that just has Lennon McCartney songs,
and that's
on
why
which
it is my favorite. And Andrew Saris of the Village Voice said at the time that A Hard Day's Night is the Citizen Kane of jukebox musicals. Later in his book, The Great Movies, Roger Ebert called it
Yeah, I was just
one of the
gonna
great life-affirming landmarks of the movies. And John, I love it that John wrote the song A Hard Day's Night in one night.
Just cranked it
He
out,
just
man.
was on fire. And our profilers, Beatle, Danny Birdsall, had this to say about A Hard Day's Night. I remember A Hard Day's Night being one of the many films that my grandfather, showed me as a little kid, which introduced me to the Beatles. A Hard Day's Night was the first Beatles song I ever heard, and I remember laughing so much at the Can't Buy Me Love number. What a great, exuberant number that is. I recently rewatched the film, and it holds up and brings back so many memories. When I think of the Beatles, this is what I picture. A Hard Day's Night, Can't Buy Me Love, that sequence where they're out in the playground.
Yeah.
I mean, like, it is so much fun to watch. That's a music video right there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Victor Spinetti is great in that as well. Everybody's
It's a plot.
fantastic.
It's a plot, I tell you.
Yeah.
I'm one on the wall.
And he stayed with them, you know. He was always available for the Beatles.
And the last word goes to Beatle, Liam Logrand, big Beatles fan, and my brother from another mother. A Hard Day's Night is a fictionalized encounter in the life of the Beatles. However, Richard Lester's directing makes the film feel more like a documentary. The Beatles are themselves, while not trained actors, have fantastic chemistry and bring many laughs throughout. Paul's swagger, Lennon's weirdness, his words, Harrison's awkwardness, and Ringo's Ringoisms are perfectly captured thanks to the ridiculous shenanigans they ensued in Alan Owen's Oscar-nominated screenplay. Watching the Beatles sing I Should Have Known Better, Tell Me Why, and She Loves You always puts a smile on my face and makes me sing along. This is easily the best film about the best band ever. Hashtag Film Geek, hashtag Beatles fan for life, hashtag profiler for life. Wow.
Did you guys listen when we had that Beatles transistor train music thing going on? Did you know about that?
No.
Our friend, I'll give you a quick version. Our friend was at Universal and he came across 2 boxes that said A Hard Day's Night. They're both tape boxes. One was incidental music from George Martin. The other one said train music. Right? So you know the scene where Ringo's listening to the transistor and the guy goes, I ride this train 2 times.
Yeah.
And you hear that rock and roll come out of there. So it's got the full version of that song, right? Which is 40 minutes. It's got a counting and an ending to it. And it said train music, the Beatles. So we were trying to figure out who was playing on it. And for 6 months we had a thing. We gave it to Ringo, we gave it to George Martin, we gave it to Giles Martin, we gave it to everybody. We found out who was on it. It's Jimmy Page is playing on it. So Jimmy Page is in A Hard Day's Night in the train sequence.
Mind blown.
Yeah, so that, and Clem Kateri is the drummer, and I found out all the guys, and I actually had George Martin, the son, on it trying to find it. So that's a little.
My mind
That
is
is
blown.
awesome.
I'll send you guys
Holy freaking
MP3s of it,
Please.
so you own it.
That's
And
awesome.
real quick, are you gonna talk about the Beatles movies that never happened? Like,
Sure, go for it.
The yellow teddy bears.
Yeah, well, that was the movie. They were going to just play a song, but
right.
they decided not to do it.
And then there was a Western. They were going to, the Beatles as cowboys, which of course, Ringo and George probably would have liked. The Talent for Loving, that was called. And then the Shades of Personality, where there was going to be a 3-way split between the personalities of all the. So they were getting all these offers all the time. But
Wow.
I guess Ringo is the guy that ended up liking the movies the best, right? Because he was, of all the Beatles, he was
the one who
most,
was the best actor.
Have you guys ever seen Sextet? Have you ever seen that movie?
I never
have
saw
not.
Sextet, but I did
Mae
see
West
Caveman.
and Alice Cooper and Ringo.
I saw That'll Be
What do you
the
think
Day.
about Candy? Do you guys like Candy?
Candy's good.
I've never
more
seen
more
it.
movie stars in Candy than any
Yeah.
other movie ever made, right?
That'll Be the Day.
Is that true? A Mad Mad World and Candy have more movies? Like,
Well, if you don't include the player.
big name
player.
movie stars in one movie. Candy was insane. Did you ever look at the?
I have not. I have not.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Richard Burton and then Ringo and one after the
Elizabeth
next.
Taylor, right? As well. Yeah,
Well, before we go, gentlemen, one last bit. Question: did you guys have Beatles haircuts? I never did. But
I
I'll
still
bet Chris
kind of
did.
might. I'm still,
During high school and right after when I started my radio career, I grew my beard out, my hair down to my belt, and I had my Lennon Summer '69 look. Then I had a shorter hair with a trimmed beard. I called it my McCartney from '70 look.
Yep.
And then in the '90s, I cut my hair like Noel Gallagher.
I gotta ask you guys a quick question.
Yep.
You're film guys.
Yes.
Did you ever see the film that I made called The Mayor of the Sunset?
I did. Yes, Rodney the Rock.
Yeah,
I saw that. That was excellent.
It has more stars in it almost as
That's like the player of documentaries. Well, before we go, just one last bit of business. Make sure, Alicia Malone, let's get that hashtag going. Let's get it trending on Twitter. The lovely and talented Alicia Malone will be back from Cannes next time. She'll be my co-pilot as always. Big shout out to Alicia. Hope you're having a great time at Cannes. That is if you're watching this, because you're not supposed to know about this. Make sure you follow Profiles by going to iTunes and subscribing to Profiles. Give us ratings, give us reviews. Really, 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 really need those. Go to youtube.com/Popcorn Talk Network. Subscribe there. Share profiles with your friends on Facebook and on Twitter. Go to our Facebook page, Profiles with Malone and Mantz. Like our page and join in on the bracket fun, on the film fun. And of course, make sure you follow us on Twitter at Movie Mantz, at Alicia Malone, at Movie Mantz, at Alicia Malone one more time, at Movie Mantz, at Alicia Malone. Follow my good friend Ken Napzok at Ken Napzok, and go to breakfastwiththebeatles.com and your other site?
ChrisCartersBritishInvasion.com.
ChrisCartersBritishInvasion.com. Gentlemen, a splendid time was guaranteed for all.
Yeah.
And I'd like to say thank you on behalf of the group and ourselves. I hope we pass the audition. Yes, go Beatles forever. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thanks,
what an
Bill.
honor. Chris Carter, thank you so much for joining us on Profiles. Go Beatles and go Profilers. Until next time, bye.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire Popcorn Talk Network, we would like to thank you for tuning in. For questions or comments, be sure to visit popcorntalk.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of the Popcorn Talk Network. The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Popcorn Talk Network or its owners or principals.